Greetings, friends. Juan and Grizzly here, and this is the weekly Russian Ukrainian War update for the week of November 11th through November 17th of 2024. And this week we have a lot of updates along the entire front this week, actually, surprisingly. And let's get right into them. We're going to first continue talking about the Karakova pocket as it slowly develops. We actually have only a few updates here this week, and we're going to talk about the South Donetsk direction. And let's get right into it. So first of all, there seems to be a pocket developing within a pocket, and what I mean by that is the giant Karakova pocket that we've been talking about before, where the Russians are moving up from the south here, trying to reach Constantinople, and then the Russians trying to move from the north and reaching Andriivka. And again, the whole purpose of this is to basically collapse this entire pocket that's been forming. But there's been a smaller pocket forming in the middle here, what I call the Uspenska pocket. As you can see, there's a pocket within a pocket, and that is where we're going to be focusing on today. So one of the biggest things in the South Donetsk direction is that the Russians are sweeping through all these fields that are between Karakova and these defenses here along the Suchka Yar river. Now, the Ukrainians have built their defenses along this river, especially around the village of Uspenska, because they were expecting a Russian attack, north towards Karakova. So they have a bunch of strong trench defense networks here. If you scroll down here, you can actually see them on the map here. So you could see this trench network right here, right in front of Uspenska. If we look behind Uspenska, we see another trench network right here. And and then we see another trench network. I believe we could see it here. But if you look at maps that show all the fortifications, there's a bunch of fortifications around Uspenska, and so and the thing is that the Russians are getting behind Uspenska, and one of the biggest movements of this week was that Russian capture of the village of Dolinia, and this was a node that connected the garrison in Karakova with the Ukrainian garrison in Uspenska. And, we have this road here that connects these two. And with the capture of Dolinica, they have basically been able to stop the usage of this road. And so now the Ukrainians have to basically use the long way around to support with Karakova. And so the capture of Dolinivka, the Russians also captured all these fields to the south here. So this entire pocket to the south of Uspenska is very much in trouble. So we're seeing a pocket develop within a pocket. And so, the Russians are slowly and methodically cutting off the support the Ukrainians have in Uspenska from Karakova with the capture of Dolinivka. And slowly but surely, all these villages along this up to Uspenska are probably going to be falling very soon. We also saw movement towards Uspenska itself. We saw movements from Maximanovka towards Constantinople and Suchka Yar. We saw that the Russians have taken some more fields to the north of it, and they are slowly approaching Suchka Yar and Constantinople. And if they're able to do this, then they're able. We see that if the Russians have basically prevented the Ukrainians from using this road, the Ukrainians could still try to use this road to go the long way around. But let's say the Russians attack and capture Constantinople here, then there's no more roads that the Ukrainians can use to supply and support the Uspenska garrison. So we saw the Russians are also moving along this road and have captured about this much land, reaching right on the outskirts of the Uspenska defenses. The Russians are also moving along the village of Trudova, which is in a contested area. So the Russians are moving along here. So they're reaching Uspenska, but I think what the Russians are trying to do is not attack it directly, and they're going to try to squeeze the Ukrainians out of here and give up this pocket. So the Russians, they're going to try to capture, secure their defenses here, and then my opinion is the Russians are going to push towards Suchka Yar and Constantinople and try to take these two villages, and then the Ukrainians will have no choice but to flee Uspenska towards, the Karakova and Dacha and, these areas right here. And then the Russians could collapse the smaller pocket that is forming. And then, then they could continue pulling up, and then they continue pushing towards Rozolva and Constantinople in the north here, and continue their operations to make to collapse the bigger pocket. But right now, one of the biggest things has been to encircle this smaller pocket, and that is where the Russians have been making the most gains. Moving slowly towards Uspenska to make a dash toward and to cut off the last supply route, a dash toward Dachna. And also, we saw that the Russians have taken the eastern part of Karakova. So this entire area has been captured by the Russians. Now these farms are in a gray zone. The one thing is that there's this kind of small river here that kind of divides the center of Karakova from the eastern part of Karakova. So there's a natural defense here that the Ukrainians are using. But this eastern part of Karakova has been taken by the Russians. So yeah, the Russians have hold what's the right word for it? A base of operations in Karakova itself, and we shall see how they continue developing this pocket in the South Donetsk direction. Let us also continue talking. Speaking of the South Donetsk direction, I'm going to merge it with the Zaporozhye area. So this week, the Russians are, we talked about how if the Russians are successful in closing this Karakova pocket, they could encircle Velika Novosolovka from the east here. Let's say they take Rozdonovka and start, cut this road, and then, put under fire control this road. Then, then the only thing they have to do is attack for the west, and the Russians have done that this week. The Russians have started their offensive operation to the west of Velika Novosilka with a mad dash towards the village of Ronopol and Novodarivka. And we talked about now, according to Syriac, Makarovka was retaken by the Ukrainians, but we don't know that. We don't have any proof of that. We saw a Russian flag there. The Russian Ministry of Defense have confirmed the capture of that village. So I believe that Makarovka is still under Russian control. And so we have something like this happening here, where Ronopol and Novodarivka and Makarovka have been captured by the Russian forces. This happened after, once the Russians improved their positions around Prinutnia, they were able to do a dash and capture Ronopol and Novodarivka. And once they secure their positions here from Ukrainian counterattacks, there's going to need to be one more dash towards the Ukrainian defenses in Novopil, Zelenia Polnya, and Novoselivka, because they need to capture these three villages in order to cut this road and then start encircling Velika Novosolovka from the west here. So, I definitely could see that once the Karakova pocket closes, that they'll start trying to encircle Velika Novosolovka. So, the capture of Ronopol and Novodarivka is a good first step, and Makarovka, and then now, once if they could hold their positions here, they could then continue pushing towards these three villages right here. Along with this, the Russians are on, we've been talking about how the Russians might do their Zaporozhye offensive very soon. There's been increasing in strikes here. There's been increasing in bombings. And the Ukrainians basically, even the Ukrainians are saying there's some sort of offensive operation here. So, we don't know what's what, but apparently the Russians have started advancing here. And again, I don't think any offensive operation here is going to be slow-paced. It's going to be slow grinding like we see in every other direction. So, it's not like we'll know the offensive starts because there's this giant, mechanized offensive to break through to the other end of Zaporozhye or something, I think that the Russians are it's gonna be a slow grind here, and we actually, according to some mappers, there's been some movements in the Orekov sector. We talked about how the Russians moved near Nestorinka last week. There's been some movements near Robotina, and the Russians have continued pushing towards Novodolinovka, and they have captured this area this week. So they are continue pushing closer and closer to Novodolinovka. Some sources are also saying that they have reached the outskirts of Mala Takhnachka and have captured this area this week. So they are slowly but surely, the Ukrainians have some, they are now going to where the Ukrainians were defending before the 2023 offensive. The entire 2023 offensive was null and void. So everything they gained were lost for the most part, except maybe Pitahatsky here. But besides that, now the Ukrainians are back in their home turf, and to defend the city of Orekov, the Ukrainians have positions in Nova Andriivka, Nova Dolinovka, and Mala Takhnachka, and Malashir Benka. And these kind of four villages act as the main defenses for Orekov. So as the Russians are going to slowly but surely try to reach these villages if they are trying to push towards Orekov. Also, there's been some movements in the Gliopolya direction. Some sources are saying the Russians have captured some more fields near the village of Drosinanovka, some more fields near Mariupol. And so, some little gains here, but Mariupol and Drosinanovka are kind of these frontline villages, and the Russians are improving their positions around them. So, my opinion is that if they do attack, they're going to probably try to attack in the middle here, try to cut off the defenses in these two roads. And, this could actually help, because if once the Russians are completed with the Velika Novosolovka, they could then, with their positions in the west, they could advance from here. And if the Russians do a push from here, they could then try to, cut this entire area here and, hold this line. And then they could outflank Leopolia from the east here. So yeah, it looks like the Zaporizhia offensive is starting. And we shall see if that's just like some rumors, it was just some small little gains, or that it is the beginning of something real. Alrighty, we're now going to talk about the Pokrovsk direction, and this we should probably when we talk about this, is basically the Selidova direction, because the movement towards Pokrovsk itself, this kind of northern part of the Pokrovsk direction, is basically silent. Where the action is happening, and there actually has been a lot of gains this week, is in the southern section of the Pokrovsk direction. Again, I don't want to say this every week, but again, the Pokrovsk direction and the South Donetsk direction are basically are moving together to try to close this Krakow pocket. So let's continue to talk about it. So here, the Russians have fully captured the village of Ilinica. We just got that confirmation with the Russians raising their flags here. We saw that the Russians, we talked about how the Russians were here last week, but we didn't get any 100% confirmation until this week. But and this week, we also have more sources coming in. The Russians will continue pushing along this reservoir and are moving towards the last village of Berestivsky, which is the last village, and as they move towards this village, they have captured what they call Novo Ilinivka, which is this little, which was the, this road that connected Krakow to the north here, and it has physically been cut. Now, I think this is like a dam or something, or like a bridge, but it's been blown up, I think, before. So this area has been completely just so it hasn't been used yet. So the Ukrainians still use this highway is the one they use. So this one is not really as impactful as you might think, but it's still interesting that the Russians have been able to physically cut this road. So even the Ukrainians rebuild this bridge, they can't use it anymore. And the Russians are now battling for Beresivsky, so they captured this kind of reservoir here. They're pushing past Ilivka and captured this area right here. And so now they're clashing for Beresivsky, and I expect this village will probably fall by the end of next week. And so, just slowly but surely, the Russians are, trying to reach Stara Terny. That is one of the main goals, because then once this kind of area is cut, then, then this the supply route for the northern part will be cut off. And then the Russians will probably continue pushing towards Andriivka. Well, probably once they restart Terny, they're going to move north to try to finally finish off Sansa-Sivka, and have this entire area taken. This will be the goal of the Russians for November. So we shall see how that develops. Yep, so that's kind of the direction of where the Russians are trying to push in terms of continuously closing this Krakow pocket. But also in the Pokrovsk direction, we have some also movement here, more in the northern direction near Selidova. And this week, the Russians are making big gains towards pushing away from Selidova and along this highway. So this week, we saw that the Russians have fully captured the village of Grigorivka, Petrorivka, and Yurivka. So, they're advancing along this rail line, and there's this river, the Solona River, that kind of divides it. But last week we talked about the Russians took the southern part of this as they advanced along the river. But then this week we saw that the Russians have entered these two villages and are raised their flags here. We also said that the Russians are raising their flags in the village of Yurivka. So this village is under control, and now Russian sources are saying that the Russians are storming the village of Pushtinyavka here. And my guess is the Russians will take this village by the end of this week. And basically the front line will be folded along this reservoir, and we shall see where the Russians will go from here. And, so the Russians are, fully securing the suburbs of Selidova, they're slowly pushing, and the reason why I say they're going to pause here is because there's this natural reservoir here that might help the Russians defend them here. I think once they do this, the Russians will start pushing westward. In fact, we actually already see this. For example, we saw a push to the south, to the north of Zorya, where they took these fields here. And my guess is once they secure Zorya and Pushtinivka here, the Russians will continue pushing along these fields, take this, and reach this highway here, try to take Nova, Leninivka, Yasenovka, and Ukrainka, and try to kind of push along these fields here. And then once they do that, they'll cut one of the major highways supplying Andriivka. And this way they could then bypass this reservoir, which also defends the Ukrainians in Zotovka. They continue pushing along this highway here, or along this rail line, and then move north along these fields and try to take Zotovka, Novopushnya, and Novotoretska here. And then try to take these 3 villages. And then once that happens, the Russians will probably then activate near Novigorivka and try to push this way, try to take Listovka, Sushka Yar, and then the Russians will be pushing north here, and the Russians will be trying to take the village of Dasaniska, Zelenia, and Zerozhelania, and try to take these villages here along this field here. And so one of the major objectives of this all, where the Ukrainians are going to make a big stand, is in the village of Shentenkovko here. This is a very big, this is a village here, and this is one of the main strongholds the Ukrainians are going to use to try to defend the Russians from entering the southern part of Pokrovsk. But I definitely see that the Russians, if we look at the global scope here, that the Russians will be pushing, and this is where the goal, once they take Shentenkovko, this is where the Russians will want to capture this amount of land. And then from here, once they capture this, they could attack Andriivka from the south. They could then attack, start encircling Pokrovsk from the south, because right now they're only on the outskirts of Minigrad, but once they reach here, they'll be on the outskirts of Pokrovsk itself. So lots of changes there, and we shall see how the Russians develop their offensive in the coming weeks. In the Tourette's direction, we have a lot of changes. One of the biggest unknown questions here is the battle for this southern residential area. A lot of, we don't, this entire residential area right here is in a big, fat gray zone. We don't know exactly what's going on or who's going on. I mean, we have FPV drones showing, like sometimes we see a Russian drone attacking Ukrainians here. Sometimes we see the Ukrainian drone dropping something here. And, so it seems like, there's no firm control of this area. And, both Ukrainian and Russian troops keep pouring into this area. And, it's always being contested. And so, there's a back and forth. So this is like a big, so it's hard to know, like, where exactly what's going on here exactly. So, this residential area has gone back and forth. First, we thought it was under complete Russian control. And then we saw that it was under, then we said it was under full Ukrainian control. Now we see that there's like, maybe there's like parts of it, and so there's a lot of back and forth here. So the clashes are big, but it's sometimes they feel like maybe we see that there's like some forward troops that maybe advance. Maybe the Ukrainians are here and advancing here, but there's no solid control and such. So, this seems like just like sort of like gray battle zone, like a no man's land, and people enter it, but then it's not like they might come there, they might become under fire, they might enter a building, but they might not be under like confident control of that building, for example. Also, the Russians have made a big dash towards the village of Dachnia here. A lot of sources are saying the Russians are pushing through from this kind of like this high-rise building area here and moving along these areas and reaching the rail line here, taking these areas here. This not only allows them to start outflanking kind of this Terrakon here, which is another defense node for the Ukrainians in Touretsk, but it also allows them to start moving, taking Dacha, taking Delinivka, and start trying to close up this southern start putting under threat this pocket in the southern part of Chasiv Yar. So some advances there. Where the Russians have made some more advances in these fields in the north here. Some sources are saying that the Russians are in this. I think we actually have geolocated footage of the Russians being in this area right here near the this area right here. So lots of fighting going on in the center of Touretsk. Lots of fighting in the center in these high-rise buildings. A lot of fighting for this Tourette's mining complex, a lot of fighting for this residential area. The Ukrainians are still in complete control of Shirebranka and Novospatska, and the area between Nipolkol and Shirebranka. This area is in this kind of also in this gray zone. So these areas, you know. And remember, the main control in Touretsk for the Ukrainians is this mining complex right here, this area right here. This is where the Ukrainians are trying to hold on for dear life. And the Russians are obviously trying to encircle it. So the Ukrainians are battling the Russians in this area. They're battling the Russians here. They are battling the Russians here. And so as you can see, the Russians are trying to encircle this large mining complex, but the Ukrainians are trying to catch them at every turn. So, there's sometimes when we look at Touretsk every week, we see small gains, but we don't really see much of. You might think that that means the battles are small, but that's not the case. This actually proves that Touretsk is one of the bloodiest battles going on in this war so far. I mean, not one of the top ones, but it's definitely up there. Alrighty, now we're going to talk about the Chasiv Yar direction. And this week we actually have a very big breakthrough in the Chasiv Yar direction, and we have the Russians breaking through and entering the center of Chasiv Yar. So before, the Russians, have had their little bridgehead on the other side of the canal in this what they call the Novi district here. But we have geolocated footage of the Russians hiding in the center of Chasiv Yar in this area right here. So the Russians have broken through and have entered this area, and so now the battles are going on for the center of Chasiv Yar. Now maybe the Russians aren't able to hold it, but this center of Chasiv Yar with the factory, with these high-rise buildings, this is where the Ukrainians are trying to hold up for dear life. And it's the fact the Russians have broken into here is very interesting, and we shall see if the Russians are able to hold it. But yeah, there's been a breakthrough into the center of Chasiv Yar, so that is a very big deal. And the Russians are also in Chasiv Yar, improving their positions in the south here. A lot of we saw geolocated footage of the Russians advancing here and trying to cross the Seversky Donets Canal in the southern section here near Andriivka and Klishevka. So, we see that they're, slowly, trying to, push the Ukrainians out of this kind of small salient here and on the other side here. So, the southern part of Chasiv Yar is in a gray zone. Syriac map has changed this map when I followed him this morning when I opened this map, and now he says that the Russians are not in control of these two terracons, even though we have geolocated footage of them there. So maybe the Ukrainians were able to push them out from the southern part of Chasiv Yar, but a lot of pro-Russian sources are saying that these two areas are still under Russian control, and that actually the battles are now going on for Stupachki. So we should wait for more geolocated footage coming out, but. So obviously if the Russians lost this, then this kind of sets them back in their progress to trying to encircle Chasiv Yar. But we have geolocated footage of the Russians being in these areas here, and so I'm going to continue assuming the Russians are here until I see geolocated footage proving otherwise. So, but if they are here still, then the Russians will probably, the Ukrainians have some strong positions in this forest, but I think the Russians are going to try to maybe attack from the south here and try to encircle this forest here with the Russian troops that have entered the center of Chasiv Yar. So the Chasiv Yar is now flaring up. It is now another area the Ukrainians have to hold on to, so we shall see how that develops. In the Seversk direction, we have what we've long known is true. The Russian command here are a bunch of retards, and they were sacked and actually imprisoned, I believe. We talked about how the Russians, they talked about the capture of Shirebranka, Grigorivka, Verkhomanyanska, and this was all actually stupid, retarded shit, because actually none of that ever happened. So, they got sacked, and, apparently the Russian commander is very dogshit, and we see this, it's like we've seen no movement on this front forever, because, no one wants to do anything here, so the Russian command here was really horrible. So, we're basically kind of back where we are, where basically Bilogorivka is still under Russian control, but still being contested. The Russians don't have control of the northern part of the hills north of Ivano-Dyrivka or north of Verkhomanyanska, which prevents them from being able to completely have control over Verkhomanyanska or Avdiivka. So again, we talked about Seversk a lot, but what the Russians have to do is take the hills to the north of Verkhomanyanska and north of Ivano-Dyrivka and Avdiivka, and if they could do that, then they could solidify their positions here and take Verkhomanyanska. And then if they do that, then they could probably and if they could secure their gains in this quarry shack here, they could secure their gains in Bilogorivka. However, the hill, if you go more to the west, it's a bit more of a high ground here, and Grigorivka and Shirobranka are more on the high ground than Bilogorivka, so you need to have control of this chalk quarry in order to secure your gains in Bilogorivka. But it just seems like the Russian command here can do it, and they got arrested, so now there's a shakeup here, so yeah. However, in the more southern part of the Severets direction, there's been some good news, is that the Russians have entered the southern part of Fedorivka. So it looks like they crossed this river here and have captured these fields to the south of Fedorivka here. This might be a prelude to advancing towards Fedorivka itself. Maybe it was just rumors, but that is something to be said here. So far, the only real gains in the Severets direction have been kind of moving away from this Bakhmut-Lysychansk highway, taking Vysola, Rozhdolivka, and kind of pushing the Ukrainians away from these from this highway. But so this is where actual real gains are, and then more in the more the northern direction of Severets, where it's been kind of more of a fake news and shit. There's been no changes in the Le Mans direction, still battling for Terni. However, where there's been a huge amount of updates is in the Kupyansk direction, and this week the Russians are now finally battling for the city of Kupyansk. This was very interesting for me. Honestly, I thought they would not attack Kupyansk directly. I thought they would fucking just avoid it at all costs because it has so much factories and high-rise buildings. But there was a massive Russian attack from the forests of Liman, Pershki, and Sinkovka here, where they attack southwards and have entered the northern part of Kupyansk. Now, Kupyansk is split in half, and by the Oskol River. So we have the Kupyansk on the eastern side here, and then we have Kupyansk on the eastern side, on the western side. And so obviously, since there's a split in the Oskol River, the Russians might not be able to take the other side of Kupyansk. However, the Russians might be able to take this eastern part of it. And what happened? So the Russians advanced along this road and have entered what they call the sugar mill factory, this area right here. And a lot of sources are saying the Russians are in control here, and they are moving across these forests to try to battle for these industrial areas right now. So these industrial areas are being contested. Also, the Russians some pro-Russians are saying they have captured this area right here, and that this entire industrial area is being contested. So it's still a little bit in the fog of war. What we have known is that, we saw geolocated footage of the Russians being here, but we did not know exactly what's the clarifying battle lines here, because it was such a mad dash from the forest all the way to Kupyansk. I didn't even expect it. So if the Russians could hold to their position, there's been a lot of various counterattacks. The Ukrainians are going back and forth here. But if the Russians could secure their, if they could cut off this bulge here where the Ukrainians have some defenses, if they could capture, continue holding their defenses here, then they could capture this area and, use the Oskol River as a defense node here. And then they could cut the Swatovo-Kupyansk highway. And then if they could do that, then, they could continue moving down southwards. And, all they need is a bridgehead. Right now, the fighting is fierce. We don't know if the Russians will finally get pushed out or if the Russians could hold on to their positions. But, if they could have a bridgehead here, then this could, this gives them a position to continue just using their firepower advantage to push the Ukrainians out of Kupyansk. So, and if they do that, then, this entire area in Petropavlovka and Kucherinivka, Poldova will be in a very bad spot. So, obviously the Russian goal is to capture the entire east bank of the Oskol River, and we shall see if the Russians could hold on to their gains in this northern part of Kupyansk. So, very big gains for the Russians in Kupyansk, or surprising ones, I should say, and we shall see if they could hold on to that. We also saw this week that the Russians have completely captured the village of Klostanivka. I think maybe I talked about this last week, I'm not sure. But they have captured this area right here. And I've secured their positions here. And it seems like the Ukrainians did a counterattack near Kotorlivka, but were repulsed. So the Russian push towards Zernotzovska has been paused for now, but we shall see if the Russians continue developing their offensive here. So, and then the Russians have also begun battles for the village of Kopany here. Some sources are saying the Russians are moving from their positions in Peshro-Turavna and are trying to take this village right here. So the biggest thing was the breakthrough into the northern Kupyansk, and the Russians are slowly but surely, trying to capture the east bank of the Oskol River. In the Kharkov direction, there's been no really big changes, except that apparently some sources are saying the Russians have crossed the border and taken Soto-Kozovka here, but I don't know why. They probably will give it up soon, but that's something to mention in Kharkov. In the Kursk direction, the Russians are continuously doing their third counteroffensive. We actually just got news that the Ukrainians now can use, American missiles to strike Russian positions in Kursk. But so far, the Russians have only had small gains here. One of the biggest things that the Russians are trying to do is liquidate this forest right here. This is where the main battles are going, because if they can't liquidate this forest, then to supply their troops in the front line here in Tuska-Yug, Zelena Shlak, Nova Ionovka, from Kornovo using this road, they'll be ambushed by the Ukrainians in this forest. And so the Russians are slowly but surely trying to squeeze this kind of pocket here and eliminate this forest. So this forest is one of the biggest battles going on right now. But they're trying to liquidate it and flatten the front line here. And the Russians we talked about it, how the Russians, pushed down along this rail line, but only captured a few villages, but it wasn't much significance. The main thing is that they are still in control of the village of Pobrivka here, and trying to hold on to their positions here. So the Ukrainians are kind of, trying to hold on here. And one of the main goals of the Russians is to was to move down along this rail line and move dash here, and then try to take something like this and take this entire pocket. So that's probably what one of the main goals of the Russians were. So we shall see, some small gains in the Kursk direction. The main thing right now is with this forest, trying to liquidate it, and then trying to hold on to their gains in the few villages they captured in the third dash. One thing where the Russians are actually having a lot of success in Kursk is in the southern direction here. The Russians have completely eliminated the Ukrainian bridgehead on the other side of the Pesi River, and have completely captured the village of Pletokonovka here. So the Russians have, completed capturing this village. The Ukrainians have fallen back to the other side here, and now the Russians will probably, try to secure their bridgehead here as they prepare to encircle Suchka from the south once the Russians complete their advances in the north here. So. The Russians made some slow gains in Kursk, but it is still not as much as their other two offensives. So we shall see how that develops. And then one of the most interesting things is in the Chernigov area, where is it here, where the Russians made a push and raised their flags in these three villages of Marinovka, Novoselivka, and Klosos. Now, the reason why they did that is because these were undefended villages, and they are on the other side of this river here, the Suchkis River. And so, the Ukrainians will have a hard time being able to, cross the, defend this when there's like river here. So, the Russians were able to cross this river, where they could supply themselves and capture these three villages in the Chernigov area. So, it's not. I think this was just like a small recon operation. Maybe it's like they withdrew when this is still a no man's land. So maybe this is actually, Russians aren't actually going to hold these villages, but it is interesting to know that they advanced in the Chernigov area. And then some bigger news. We talked about how the Russians are, the Ukrainians now have the ability to strike Ukrainian positions with long-range American missiles in Kursk. And we also, in response to that, the Russians did a large-scale attack on Ukrainian energy infrastructure, which hasn't happened in the last few months. So, yeah. So that's the end of this video. Hope you guys enjoyed. Be sure to like this video if you liked my breakdown of this weekly Russian-Ukrainian War update. Be sure to comment your thoughts and subscribe to my channel if you want to continue receiving these weekly Russian-Ukrainian War updates. So aim high and wander on.